So yeah, I hosted the installation called Disappearance as a Mode of Production. And so what we did, we had three different subjects. One painted fully in white with teeth painted black, one painted fully in black with teeth painted white, and then one subject fully painted in chrome. It's all about, disappearance. So behind them, we had two different backdrops, a white backdrop and a black backdrop. And so we were turning the lights on and off manually and continually for the exhibit. And so when we had the black backdrop, whenever we turned the lights off, the subject painted in black would disappear fully and smile. And so the body would disappear, but the teeth would appear. But then in the same subject matter, the body of white would appear, would accentuate, and then the black teeth, when they'd smile, would disappear. And then when we did the inverse of that and we had the white backdrop, the character painted in white would disappear into the white, but the teeth of black would appear, and vice versa for the subject in black. And so it was kind of like a reverie or contemplation on disappearance itself being something entirely contextual and sort of outside of the intention of the object of itself. The main statement is why should validation be presupposed upon visibility or engagement when that's something completely out of the intent and control of the subject itself, when disappearance itself can be entirely contingent and contextual. White, the three colors, white was supposed to represent the ultimate form of reflection. Black was supposed to represent the ultimate form of absorption when it comes to light and information, and chrome was supposed to represent the ultimate form of reflexivity or self-referentiality, an idea with negative affirmation and positive negation, really to have something be negative but in the space of the positive. So something the chrome, where it can exist as a negated subject but still fully appear and become accentuated, was an interesting idea for me. When it comes to visibility, we wanted to try to really reconcile a visibility that's exists not even as a rejection of visibility, because a rejection of visibility itself becomes fully reliant upon visibility. Disappearance of disappearance becoming a mode of production. That sort of negative affirmation, where now what it means to disappear is also disappearing. That becomes in itself a new form of production. And that's what we see with the three subjects, because in their disappearance is a new form of producing. And this can exist, again, outside of tangibility. So within these contradictions kind of creates a new form of observation itself. When we exist outside of the paradigm of visibility and invisibility with the disappearance, the observer itself is ultimately changed. I called it the X. The new observer became the X. It's both hyperscene and entirely transparent. Utter transparency becomes the same thing as invisibility. So the black subject is visible but yet unseen, and so this contradiction is why the form of consumption for the observer changes itself, so it's an observer with nothing to see. And so the act itself now prefaces the actual subject matter or the actual function of said action itself. So, now we have the empty vessel of a functioning object seeing but not seeing anything. And so now seeing itself becomes an object autonomous of, the human recognition. And I think we're kind of really reconfiguring what recognition means, because now recognition is outside of tangibility. So when disappearance itself changes and then processes, we're in the post-object functioning world where function and form itself have entirely inverted and disposed of themselves. That gets into belief and irony and post-irony and the convergence of the two, and obviously traditionally irony was accelerated to the point of post-irony into the new sincerity. For me, I was kind of sort of exploring that a little bit. I hired a friend to come and sort of shit on it and be this exhibit sucks, tapping everyone on the shoulder, like, hey, you see this sucks, why the fuck am I here? And then I was gonna have, well then, so I would see him kind of talking shit about the exhibit, and I pretended to get really mad. And I was like, get the fuck out of my exhibit. And I just caused a whole scene. And I had him slap me, and then when he slapped me, my friend, who wasn't in on me, only me and him were the only ones in on it. My other friend came and slapped him, and it became a huge scene. Everyone was kind of freaking out. Everyone was feeling really just disoriented and disheveled, and it was a crazy scene. And it was super interesting because to see something entirely artificial have real life implication like that. Irony, post irony, because for me, I posit, sincerity itself, stupering itself in the ironic. It's a new form of communication being ironic. It's sincerity and irony become one in a way. My best example is kind of like, it's a stupid example, but it makes a lot of sense to me, like Instagram comments, someone's playing like a sad song, it's like a sad edit, and most of the comments, rather than being overtly sincere, they're sort of filled with like emojis. So it'll be like, when you're depressed and you just can't take it anymore, laughing emoji, 100 emoji. And it's totally ironic, but they mean that shit.
Is it part of it, dog? What was he saying? Albi's about to go kick his ass.
It's almost becoming one. It's not to the point where like things ironic are so ironic that people want to return to sincerity. It's to the point where like irony and sincerity themselves both fundamentally change. And so I chose this image of someone smiling, or like an emoji smiling, but you can kind of see, even though it has the signifier or the semiotic of something smiling, it effaces or evokes an image of sadness and profound sadness and suffering. Signifier and signified both are self-referential, and there's no object that they're signifying anymore. The relationship between the signifier and the signified is outside of an object itself, and it's outside of communication itself. The disappeared becomes the new object, and the disappearance of disappearance becomes a mode of production. People see something as like being performative, as like tying to being insincere, but I think it's not. I think that's all overlapping and adjacent, and it's all part of a giant almost threshold that's all becoming one and flattening. I think a really good example of this is like, you're constantly performing. The way I talk to my friend at a party is different from the way I talk to my grandma. It's two different forms of performances, but both them and themselves are sincere. It's not that they're necessarily insincere. So I think, the mask is the soul. The observer is produced from the object that is being perceived. So rather than like something seeing something, the thing itself produces what sees it. And I use this as example, just verbally, the new black hole. So X becomes the observer, and the new black hole becomes a subject. So the thing that you're looking at in itself is self-consuming and producing what sees it, rather than the original way where like, when you see something, that's where the relationship starts. It's now inverted a little bit, which I think is super interesting. And it's just an idea I've been really trying to explore in like a lot of my art. So like consumption and production now become the same phenomenon under the X, or the new observer. And so when consumption and production no longer are dichotomous and become, singular, the things that we see and the things that see them also become singular. And so it really changes the entire paradigm, and we were trying to do that with his exhibit, like taking on like background and foreground a little bit. Sort of, that disposition no longer exists. And I think there's this writer named Aria Dean, where it's really interesting, like she talks about, the adjacency, or I guess the overlap between like black as like in the vacuum of space, and black as like the political subject, or blackness as a political subject. And and it's interesting to see that like, blackness is inherently political. And I think I couldn't really, when you have someone painted fully in black, you can't really deny that political reality. Even existing in invisibility or rejection of visibility, it itself produces, hyper politicization. And so when use the subjects of like the babies, because it produces this almost self-infantilization where, through the hyper-politicization, the only form of rejecting that hyper-political nature is sort of this sort of self-infantile nature, and where the infantile and the senescent both become one, to be young and to be old and to escape function, because that's the only way to escape the inevitable political nature. And I compare that to like the entropy or the slow atrophy of space, how it's all slowly spreading. And for me, I really like this dichotomy of like the young and the old, like a old baby or like a young old guy. Because for me, like aging is the ultimate form of disappearance. Slowly withering away, and your cells reproducing themselves to the point of utter disappearance is interesting to me. Now, when those sort of initial frameworks themselves become rejected, now aging itself, the ultimate form of disappearance, also becomes rejected, and that changes linearly, and like the human physical strata also changes. So now, being young and being old can be simultaneous, and they can be converged. Because I was obsessed with the idea of like the space post-death and pre-birth. In theory, that this space is the same exact and pure matter, but it operates differently. Like pre-birth exists as potentiality, and post-death exists as like finality. But I'm very interested in like how the crossroads between those two, and how those two overlap, and what's the implication of that, dignifying the signified through transparency. Because I think because to be transparent is to be utterly see-through, but still visible. And I think that's interesting, because you could still be seen but also unseen. You could just see through something, so almost their physical form becomes phasmophobic or something. It's almost spectral. And that's interesting. So because a transparent figure is one that's like fully actualized by its context, I think. And I think transparency is something that like, it has to do with the access to information. Pure accessibility gets to the point where everything is so hyper accessible, to the point where it all disappears. Everything is so just transparent that its implication becomes meaningless. And I think the best political example is that something with like the 3 million Epstein files that were dropped through emails, through this overabundance of information and accessibility, it becomes almost meaningless and has no real political reality or anything tangential, And so I think it's almost being weaponized in that way. And so that's something else I wanted to explore in the exhibit, like over-actualization of information and access itself becoming something invisible and disappeared and having no implication. And I think that's something we're seeing a lot more of. It's like the Platonic example of like staring into the sun, a form of forms, where the sun is what gives all form itself, but yet itself is totally unseen. But it's not unseen in terms of being invisible. It's unseen in being in terms of too visible. And that sort of nuance is what we want to explore as much as possible with this exhibit.